complete fraud because one, I'm not the useful kind of doctor, and two, I have no qualifications in psychology or cybersecurity, which is great. I'm standing up here as a doctor of cyber psychology, specializing in cybersecurity. This is academia, it gets weird. Social identity theory, it's one of my favorite theories. There's going to be the word theory used quite a lot this evening. I'm sorry, it's psychology, they make us. And your social identity is basically how you present yourself to the rest of the world. Social psychology is based on the idea that we are all impacted by interacting with other people. Whether it's real or imagined interaction, we modify our behavior because we're social animals. And the way people think of themselves in terms of belonging to groups can again affect their behavior. So they use in-jokes, slang. It's like football teams have their own chants, their own uniforms, and that's all marking them as a member of that group. And there's certain ways that are accepted to behave and are not. Just a quick question for the audience. Who here is a security practitioner of some form? Okay. Who here is a software developer of some form? Okay, that's good. This helps my talk. So, basically, I've just asked you to put yourselves into two groups based on what you do for a living or what your interests are. And even just categorizing yourselves like that is enough to create an in-group, your group, and an out-group, the other group. So it's us and them. And when you start to categorize like that, even just that simple act, that can create intergroup competition and conflict. So if I said, like, oh, if we have now all the software developers and the security practitioners, they're going to have a race, I'd be creating competition between you based on this arbitrary grouping that if I hadn't asked you about, no one would have necessarily thought of. And what this means in terms of online is you get different groups, different forums, people who identify with different group memberships, competing, trying to recruit more members, using resources, and you can start off with a very, very small group, like you did with the DevSecOps London gathering, and it grows, and at some point it may even get too big for itself, and what do you do then? So I'm not going to go into that too much, but basically social identity can have a huge impact on how you interact with those around you. And that includes the group processes that people go through. So if you're part of a group, group cohesion is a very important element. The more cohesive a group is, the more likely the members are to conform. So if you've got a tight group of friends that all know each other really well, they know what behavior is and isn't acceptable within that group. And they try to stay in line, so to speak, with the unspoken rules. People also get a lot of self-esteem from group memberships, as in, I'm part of this group, and this reflects well on me. For example, I'm a doctor, and I can take pride in that. It's an achievement. Not everyone is a doctor, mainly because it's a bit pointless. In a very positive way. And people conform in order to protect their self-esteem, the groups that make them feel good. No one wants to belong to a negative group. So they try and... Sorry?
Yeah, minorities.
Yes, that's not a chosen part of it though, is it? Depending on how what sort of group you're referring to, but yes, point taken. There's also the fear of social disapproval, so you don't want to stand up here and do something that's completely unacceptable and have everyone think, well, that's a terrible thing for her, why would she say that? So I'm trying to conform to your group norms. I'm trying to talk about something that you will find interesting, whilst it being my area of expertise. And the bigger the group, the more likely you are to conform. So if it's a group of 3 people, fair enough, you can disagree, you can do it your own way. If it's a group of 30, there needs to be some sense of conformity and order in order for the group to be able to function. There's also the element of perceived interdependence. So once you belong in that group, there's the idea that your fate relies on the actions of other people. You can hurt or harm your group, which would hurt or harm yourself and your self-esteem. but working towards a shared common goal is a very unifying factor. So when you have a group, there is always that unifying aim or goal or passion, and you work together. That brings you more together. So just briefly about a couple of other group processes. Informational influence, the desire to be correct. I've checked all my sources because I don't want to stand up here and say something that's completely wrong, because that would make me look like an idiot. But we always look to other people as a source of how we should behave. So for example, if I'd come in here this evening and everyone was drinking and swearing, then maybe I'd use a slightly different style of presentation. If I'd come in here and everyone was wearing suits and ties, I'd definitely be underdressed. But we rate the judgments of others as being more reliable than our own. I mean, if you think about it, how many times have you been waiting to cross a road and you're waiting for the light to change, but you see someone else looking and going across and you think, yeah, okay, it's probably safe then if they're doing it. If they're cross, I'll cross. And it's not that they're necessarily any more reliable than you are when it comes to road crossing, but we tend to assume that other people are being very logical and sensible, even if that's quite obviously not the case. So the informational influence can again change how you behave in order to impress the group. When it comes to normative influence, that's the pressure to conform to the norms of the group. So what the normal behavior is, you will try and maintain that behavior. So even if you wanted to disagree about something, even if at the moment I'm saying something and you disagree, the norm is I've got the microphone, so you've got to let me finish talking. And you will suppress the disagreement, maybe until the questions after, which I look forward to. An example of this online is following the forum rules. If you don't obey the rules, you will be evicted from the group. And again, a factor in this is whether or not you think you're being observed by a larger group. So it's the idea that, you know, when you're in a lift, if you notice a security camera, you're more likely to just sort of stand there and, you know, not scratch your bum or anything like that. You're going to behave in a respectable way, one would hope. And the last bit on group-related factors is the concept of groupthink, which I assume some of you will have heard of. It's the idea that when people are all in a group together, they conform to the point where it's actually dangerous for them. The groups make riskier, more extreme choices, they don't behave sensibly, and they don't argue, they don't express doubts, they just sort of go along with the idea. And this can be very unhealthy. It can lead to extreme behavior, cyberbullying, people getting caught up in what the group's doing without actually thinking it through. I think some good examples of it were with the case of Anonymous and Gamergate. That's one example. I was thinking of the PayPal 14 with the DDoSing. But anyway, so these are all examples of the dangers of groupthink. So, my PhD was looking at the social identity and the group processes within hacking communities. And when I say hacking communities, I don't mean the black hat cyber criminals that are putting in ransomware and stealing your credit cards and everything else. I mean the hackers, the general normal people that actually just really like doing things with technology, finding shortcuts, making improvements. And I have to say, I really enjoyed my 3 years of doing it. I met some really lovely people. They were all very interested and supportive. But the start of this research was security. It does lag behind the technology, the advances that we make. We can't patch all the flaws quickly enough. And that is something that hackers can help with. They can also exploit it. It's a double-edged sword. But a hacker is not necessarily a criminal, was my initial argument. Someone who defines themselves as a hacker may not have broken any laws. Does that matter? If there's a lack of criminal intent and they do break a law, is that reasonable? Is that excusable? And how important are the motivations? If they're doing it to make an improvement in something with good intentions, does that make it okay that they access someone else's computer? Well, legally, morally, I think the answer's no, but it gets interesting and you get the grey areas. But overall, what I found was there a very passionate community that get very engaged, very supportive, and I'm going to go through some of my findings from that. The emphasis of my research was making sure that the group processes weren't influencing them to the point that there was no informed decision making. So regardless of whether they broke the law or not, did good things or bad things, they knew what they were doing. That was what I wanted to determine. So I did 3 studies, 2 surveys and some interviews. Got some good responses. I collected data by posting on forums and subreddits and saying, hey, come do my survey. First one got 155 responses, second one 197. This is pretty good if you're going into hacking communities and saying, hey, do you want to tell me about your life? That'd be great. Because they're surprisingly secretive. Yeah, I know, it baffles me. So, in study 1, I made the mistake of asking, do you consider yourself a hacker? Bearing in mind, I was posting on forums that were specifically about hacking. It was all to do with the hacker lifestyle, hacks, finding new technologies, learning. Do you consider yourself a hacker? Just over half of them said yes. 33% said no, which was a bit puzzling. Why did they take a survey that was questioning hackers, asking about hackers on hacker communities, and they didn't define themselves as hackers? And then there was 15% that said they didn't want to answer, which one of my supervisors told me obviously meant that they were hackers. I was like, I don't think I can use that, but... So once I'd asked, do you think you're a hacker or not, the people that said yes, I asked them to put themselves into a subcategory, because the subcategories are very much how people define themselves within the groups within the groups. So the main ones I was looking at was white hat, black hat, grey hat, and I thought it was interesting that grey hat was the largest group because it's so undefined. And yet people are putting themselves in a subcategory that has no boundaries. I mean, what point does it change from grey to black or grey to white? And it was, it was just more of it was a larger group than I was expecting. I very much cherry-picked the results of this survey, of this study, mostly because there were a lot of them and they weren't all very interesting. But one of my favourite examples, I asked, weaknesses and flaws should be exposed in systems and software, and that was strongly agreed, very obviously. The blue lines, all the way on agree. Weaknesses and flaws should be exploited. That was a much more divided, much more divisive question, and to the point where the largest group of answers was neither agree nor disagree. They didn't believe that it should be exploited, or they didn't care. They didn't want to answer, which is not what you'd expect from hackers in the criminal intent stereotype. So in study 2, I started talking to hackers. I interviewed 14 people who all defined themselves slightly differently. But it was very interesting, and a lot of them said they now work in security or they're a white hat, InfoSec, and yet they still acknowledged black hat behavior in the past. Most of them made it very clear that this was before, the Computer Misuse Act. I was like, it's okay, I'm not going to tell. But so I asked them, what does it mean to hack? What is hacking? And I had various different answers, but these are a couple of my, I've got a couple of quotes here. What I do is no different from what the criminals we called hackers do. The only difference is I do it on commission with permission. And that's an interesting distinction. I mean, the permission bit I think is the most, but the fact that he includes the fact that he gets paid for it. I mean, so the only difference between him and a hacker is that he doesn't have a criminal hacker doesn't have permission and may or may not get money from it. But when I asked about hacking in the community, the purpose of doing any sort of hack, all of them agreed to varying degrees that it was about gaining knowledge. Information is currency. It's not about getting the best exploit. It's about improving things. It's about learning more. It's about evolving what we have. And the other consensus was very much that hackers need to be informed, not just about coding or tech, but on privacy, information security, and anonymity, whether it exists or not. There was a lot of debate about that. So, what they want is to learn, they want information. If you hack without any sense of curiosity, then you're a skid, which is short for script kiddie, I'm sure most of you know, which means you don't build your own things, you download other people's and use them, other people's software and use that to hack. So when I started asking about the subgroups of a hacker, black hat, white hat, grey hat, I don't think hacker is a singular identity. A black hat hacker is a hacker. A grey hat hacker fudges the truth. A white hat hacker is someone who put the truth down somewhere and forgot where. Hackers are very cynical. And then there was the concepts that whilst you can be elite in one aspect, you can still be a complete noob in another. It's not a black and white, yes, you've ticked this box, so you can call yourself a hacker. There was quite a lot of debate, actually, in whether or not someone could call themselves a hacker, or if the community needed to accept them for that. Some people saw it as gatekeeping and stopping new people from joining. Others saw it as maintaining standards. So even within a community that agrees on a lot of things, there's still a lot of debates, and that is one of my favorite things about the hacking community. Doesn't matter what your opinion is, you need to have evidence. You need to be able to back up your argument and prove it. And the other thing that they were quite aware of is the fact that there is no best practice. It's all still relatively new in terms of human history, technology. It's young. So for study 2, I found that there very much was a hacker social identity, how they define themselves, and similarities. To a degree, there was a sort of a loose global one, but obviously aspects change depending on culture. There was no real consensus, like I said, about having the shared group identity, because some people felt it brought them closer together, some people felt it was a way of excluding people, which obviously was not what they wanted from a community. But what was interesting, even though I got all these people to talk to me about all this, there's still a very cautious approach to trusting others online, even within the community. They're highly aware of the consequences of their actions. Previous studies had said that, I think it was in 2007, a previous study said that hackers were not thinking about the consequences of what they do. That is very much not the case nowadays. They're all very aware that what they do can be attributed to them and need to be careful. Some people went to different extremes. I had one participant who modified a very old, but one of the early smartphones, so that it had no location GPS or anything like that, and he'd stockpiled them, and that's the only phone he used. I had another who literally had his whole life detailed on the internet, easy for anyone to find, and his logic was, if I take the challenge out of it, no one's going to be interested. If it's not hard to dox me, then no one will want to. And neither of them had had any problems, but it's quite extreme ways of dealing with it. So, study 3. This time I didn't ask, do you think you're a hacker? And it's amazing how many more responses I had in the groups, in the subcategories. So if I asked people, are you a hacker? 33% of them in the first one said no. If I just straight away asked them, which subcategory do you put yourself in? It was only 7% that disagreed with my categories, 9% that said other, and some of them got very specific. Pedantry is definitely a part of hacking. However, there was a big jump and an extra category in InfoSec, and it was partly the communities that I've been in touch with and the talks that I've been doing. Obviously, it drew a lot of interest from information security people. So there was an overlap. So InfoSec was suddenly the largest group, but a lot of them still counted themselves as a white, black, or grey hat, which it's interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily thought that InfoSec and a black hat hacker would be two subcategories you'd put yourself into. No, it's they were allowed to select more than one category. It's okay. It's not bad maths. I did actually, and I found various participants had categorized themselves as black and white or grey and white, and anyone that had put themselves into that category, I actually asked them to rank the. I asked them to place themselves on a scale between pure black to pure white, tactics, morals, everything. And it was very interesting, the spectrum that it went across. So there were some people that said they were a white hat hacker that had placed themselves at about 12%. Others, I think the highest black hat was about 50%. But otherwise, it was widely spread. So white hat hackers said they were like 70% white, and they'd use a little bit of less white hat tactics, I suppose. After I'd gotten all this information, one of the questions I asked was, people had put different emphasis on different things, importance of different traits. So I asked my participants to rank them. And I gave them another category because, like I said, they like to disagree and argue a lot. So, quite obviously, the most important trait, according to the communities, was curiosity and desire for knowledge. That's the most important thing about being a hacker. That's their main defining trait, which actually really surprised some of my computing team, as they were very much in the idea of hacker equals bad. The others, that wasn't quite so clear-cut, but passion, mentality were both ranked quite highly. Technical ability, people said, yes, that's important. It's interesting, actually. I'm designing another survey for software developers, and I asked a similar question, and I got a software developer colleague of mine to go through it. And the first thing he did was say, right, well, technical ability, that's the most important, and he put that at the top. And then he started reading through the other ones, and he was like, actually, the curiosity, that's very important. Social skills, that's important. And in the end, coding ability was down at the bottom, not because he didn't think it was important, but because he felt that the other things were just as, if not more, important. So for me, it's very interesting to see this community's assumptions of itself and how accurate they are. I wish I'd been able to include more slides on this, because the participant comments were really what made it for me. I tried to get quantitative data, and damn it, they just kept on telling me things in comments and forms. And so these are a couple of my favorite comments. I believe in our community as a whole. I'm a part of it just like you are. People have helped me, I'm helping you. That was in response to me asking, why have you taken part in this? You know, I've had nearly 200 people submit to a hacker survey. Why would you do this? What's in it for you? And they were like, you're part of the community. I want to help you. That's what you do in this community. Whenever I can contribute and give back to the community, I try to do so. Another participant basically said, I want to try and improve the understanding of hackers. I want them to know that we're not the bad guy. I want to educate the general public. And they saw taking part in my research as a legitimate way of doing this. Another said, I had one comment that said, put a footnote in your thesis that you were helped by the cult of the dead cow. And I was like, excellent. I've no idea if it's true or not, but that my favorite comment in response to why did you take part in this, and they said, because you asked nicely. And that quite honestly is the one that's floored a lot of academic peers. Some people haven't quite believed that I've spoken to hackers. I was like, well, I asked. I treated them like they were people. Crazy, I know, for psychology. So the conclusions from my PhD were that learning and curiosity are very desirable traits within these communities. There's the hacking cycle. You have to prove your worth, do your research, show that you can make the effort. It doesn't matter if you're good or not. It doesn't matter if you succeed first time or not, or if you keep on trying. The point is that you have to try. And then, if you do these things, you will be accepted. Once you're accepted into the community, the norm for the group is that you expect this behaviour with the newcomers that come on from you. You're meant to encourage them, but you also need to test them. You can't just, babysit them. The community is still very suspicious and does not like very specific outgroups, continuing that anti-authoritarian streak that hackers are so famous for. So, overall, there were clear social group processes present in the hacking communities, but it didn't actually lead to organised action. There weren't the in-group, out-group conflicts between the subcategories that I'd expected. Comparing being a football fan and being a fan of a specific team, then you have another team that you hate. This didn't happen, apart from they did tend to look down on people who did it for money, basically. Anyone that was a criminal hacker trying to make a profit, they thought, you're not doing it for the right reasons. That's not what hacking is, which I thought was interesting. The groupthink was extremely limited and often identified by members in discussions, and then of course they do what hackers do and have an argument about it and ask for evidence and say, well, if you think this, prove it, back it up. And there's nothing like a group of hackers to get an argument going. So those that identified as white hats were less likely to behave in toxic ways online, not really a shock. But they also, as I said, acknowledged their past grey-black behaviour, and I don't think there were very many that had always been pure ethical white hat hackers. It was more of a process and wanting to legitimise their choice and their interest and make a career out of it, and that's now an opportunity. So you have people that would have possibly been the stereotypical bedroom lurker in a hoodie 20 years ago, but now they're a grown-up with family and a good job. That doesn't mean they're not a hacker anymore. And sorry?
So it means that they need more money because now they have kids to provide.
Well, I mean, possibly. That's a good motivation. And overall, it's a very interested and engaged community. And basically, the future, I mean, what can it lead to? It's a very interesting area, especially as it is trying to legitimize itself. I mean, you all work in security or have an interest in it. I expect some of your colleagues would actually define themselves as hackers, maybe not out loud, but... So, what this means for security is that group processes can be used in a positive way. So the strongest identity influences the behavior. So sometimes you need to activate the right identity in order to get people to work together. And if you give them the collective goal, it fosters trust, even if they're in a different subcategory. If you've got the same goal and you're working together and you know that the other person is just as set on it as you are, it's going to bring you together. There's a very much a common sense approach to security, but even small actions and precautions can make you a little bit safer. You can't be 100% secure, but you can try. I'd also argue that some security approaches could also be improved by accepting that there is always the vulnerability. This isn't always a popular idea. And just to add a couple of small criticisms about my own research, highly Western, the gender differences were ignored because it's a very male-dominated area. But overall, there were positive and negative ways that you can use the social psychology for the group processes, and it can help to improve security. So that was all last year. I finished my PhD last November. And fortunately, doing hacking communities, it really prepared me for my examination, because if you say something, they will grill you on it. I feel like I had several vivas. My current project, I work at the University of Portsmouth. I'm a researcher there, and I'm looking at securing software development through social practice theory. I told you the theories would be back. Basically, the starting point is you need the earlier inclusion of security to improve software. That obviously needs developers' involvement. DevSecOps is all about shifting it to the left. However, in order to get the most out of the teams, out of working together, there really needs to be an understanding of software developer culture, which I don't think really exists yet. I'm going to go through some previous research on the matter as well, but software developer culture has been shown to go across countries, organizations. They've got certain understandings and cultures that will always be true no matter what their actual context is. Also, it's argued that now socio-technical problems can't just be solved by technology alone. If that were true, then we'd probably be making a lot more progress. So we need to know about the software developer culture. We need to know about the social practices that are involved and understand how they work and how that impacts security. This was something I did a couple of weeks ago, actually, out of curiosity. I decided to scrape 224 ads from 5 of the big UK job sites for software developer. I removed the duplicates, I got the job title and the description down, and then I did a word search for the frequency of the word secure. In 200 ads, secure came up 8 times. Half of those times it was talking about bike facilities. Which is great. You know, you want your bike to be safe, but you know, it wasn't quite what I was looking for. I did the same with security, found 27 mentions in 200 ads. Relevant to the role, 11. Otherwise it was talking about job security or what the company does. And my argument here is, people are expecting, there's a lot of pressure on software developers to work on the security, to improve it. It's not explicitly mentioned to them. I found out of 200, there were 15 mentions of securing code, working with security in software, and 15 out of 200. And we're expecting software developers to all know that they have a responsibility for security. This is where I come to communication. It's all very well people expecting them to know this, but you need to clearly state it, make sure that people understand the responsibility from the beginning. If you apply for a job and then get told, by the way, you've got this whole extra responsibility that you don't necessarily know about, it's going to throw you. And that was just something I found really interesting in terms of communication. So previous research into software developers, there's a very adversarial environment created. Developers get blamed a lot for security failures. I'm not saying that's not always the case. Sometimes they will be responsible, yes, but sometimes maybe not. And always assuming that it's their responsibility and their problem is actually a very damaging attitude. You can't improve security through blaming people. You can alienate them, they're not going to want to cooperate with teams, and basically it really emphasizes the need for improved communication between security and developers. Also, it's been acknowledged that developers are now regularly asked to do more from what they ever used to be. There's not been very much research on things from their perspective and how they find this, how it affects their workload, how it affects their productivity. Overall, it can be quite hard to get people to be positive about security, partly because it's a never-ending problem, and partly because people miscommunicate and create these antagonistic vibes. Positive attitudes lead to greater intention to comply. If you can be positive about security, you can get people to change their behavior. And this is shown to affect the actual compliance of following security advice. And finally, it seems a little bit obvious, but people that are happy in their jobs, they tend to do a better job. So happier developers are more productive and efficient. Being valued and taking pride, it led to increased collaboration in teams. If you care about what you do, you want to do a better job, you'll work with people harder. So bearing this in mind, my current research is looking at what software developers are currently doing and how it can be altered or improved to help aid security, improve communication in interdisciplinary teams. So I'm using social practice theory because it looks at the entire structure. It looks at what's happening in the real world context. The ideological shift is away from blaming people, which I think is great. No one wants to sit there and be blamed. There's been a slow uptake of social practice theory, especially in technological areas, mostly because it's highly qualitative. You can't measure it with time spent or work output. That's not what it's about. And that makes it harder to translate into economic effects, and therefore it makes it harder to persuade people that actually it's really important. But looking at software development, software developers are humans. There is no way you can define a human purely with numbers. There's a lot more to it. There's always an emotional connection to something. You take pride in your work. You get frustrated when the code goes wrong. You're happy when you finish something. It's all very emotional, and that's been overlooked. So the qualitative data can include the motivating factors, which can be really important. If you give the right motivation to people and keep them enthused and engaged, you can get a very productive team going. So social practice theory, this is a brief explanation. I promise I won't go on about it too long, but it's the examination of preferences, habits, behaviors in the social context. It's not about the individual. It doesn't matter who the person is that's performing these practices. It's about what they're doing. And a practice is behavior and understanding normalized by routine. So it's a regular occurrence. Part of the reason I like social practice theory is because it's very good for interdisciplinary, because I'm applying a psychological theory to a technological field, one that, as I said, I'm not technical. I don't know. I tried coding. I'm not very good. I can edit a website, which my mum likes it. But yeah, so basically there's a lot to consider, and there's a lot that I don't know I don't know, but I want to know. So this is a slightly confusing picture, but it's the best way I can explain it. The core of social practice are three elements: competence, what you know, what you can do; meaning, the cultural expectations, the shared understanding; and the material, the objects and the tools that you actually use to do it. So for example, riding a bike. The social practices of riding a bike would be knowing how to ride a bike, knowing where to ride a bike, where is it acceptable, in bike lanes preferably, and what do you need to ride a bike? You need a bike. So these three things make up the practice of cycling, but it's never a standard static thing. It's forever changing. So you, the practitioner, can influence yourself. You can teach yourself to ride better. You can perform the practice. The way you perform it, you'll have different experiences every time, maybe with traffic, maybe with something else. And that will all impact your understandings, your competence, and how you do it the next time. I mean, if you fall off your bike and injure your head, you're going to wear a helmet next time. So therefore, you've evolved your practice. That's just a very basic example. Where am I? So, yeah, all I'm going to say on this one is basically social practice theory helps you spot the patterns. It makes the actions and the interactions more distinct, so you can see more where the strengths and the weaknesses lie. So, yes, I want to use it to provide insights into the developer habits, motivation, identity. Behaviors towards security can be ameliorated and hopefully help to reduce the adversarial environment. And with social practice theory, you can make small alterations to a routine that can generate big improvements. It makes some actions very much more likely than others. So, communication leads to community. Build positive environments, open discussions, use group processes in a positive way, emphasize the interdependence, how we need to work together, and how we have a shared fate, almost. Informational and normative processes can be used to bring people together and also to foster a community feeling. If you feel like a community, you trust each other more, you work together better. And especially encouraging discussions, because groupthink can never end well. Question the stereotypes. And then in terms of cybersecurity communication, I'd say it's always important, whether you're talking to the general public, an organisation or software developers, give people hope. Good Lord, the world is bleak. We need to be encouraging each other to keep on trying, otherwise what's the point? Don't use fear or uncertainty or threats, because it's just overwhelming. People are going to give up, and if the software developer community gives up, then, well, where are we going to get our software? Yeah, so basically the point of this talk was to try and emphasize how group processes and communication can make a real difference to behavior within these teams. And yeah, my current research is using social practice theory to examine these communities and habits, and I'm hoping to find some insight. I'll keep you updated. Thank you very much for listening.